Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Surrey Board of Trade. I am Rona Doria, Events and Sponsorship Coordinator of Surrey Board of Trade. I want to welcome you to today's Digital Impact Learning Lab, Creating Meaningful Access. I wanted to remind you that if you have any questions during this session, please put your questions or comments in the chat function and we will get to them as soon as we can. If we are unable to answer your questions, we will get back to you after the session is over. Additionally, you can also turn on your captions. I acknowledge that we are in the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Kwantlen, Katsi, Kwiketlam, Kakait, Semiahmoo, and the Tuasan First Nations. As well, I acknowledge the Inuit and Métis Nations peoples who live and work on these territories. The workshop is hosted by the soon-to-merge Surrey and White Board of Trade, an independent non-profit organization in concierge of connections for Surrey and White business communities, where we deliver a diversified service portfolio of business development, support for international trade, government advocacy, and workforce development. We support business and attract business, which is now more vital than ever before. Check our diversified portfolios at businessandsurrey.com. Your facilitator today is Marco Pasqua, an award-winning entrepreneur, accessibility consultant, and inspirational speaker with cerebral palsy. Throughout his career, he has been a vocal advocate for people with disabilities in Canada, working with various organizations and business leaders to promote more accessible and inclusive environments. He aims to ensure all Canadians have universal access to the programs and services they need. Marco, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rona, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today. I'm so thrilled to be with you for the next hour to kind of talk about not only accessibility and creating meaningful access, but my personal journey as I'm a person with a disability myself. And so that's why we actually call this presentation Creating Meaningful Access in the Workplace. And I'm going to explain what meaningful access means in a couple of minutes here. But just really quickly on myself, I'm an inspirational speaker, an accessibility consultant, a Rick Hansen Foundation accessibility certified professional. And in my personal life, I'm a husband, father, and I'm an author. And I wrote a book about creating authentic connections because I think that that's really important. I think we often forget that in our work, we focus on what it is that we provide as a service, but we forget about who we are as a person or people. And I think that that's really, really important because that's really reflects in how we show up in the work that we do and who we are and how we provide services. So over the next hour, we're going to cover some incredible things. We're going to talk about an introduction to accessible built environments and what it means to create accessible environments in your workplace, conducting an audit of your workspace and what that looks like in terms of working with a professional like myself. And by the way, I'm a Surrey-based business owner myself. So, I mean, this is really an awesome thing for me to be connecting with you all, being in Surrey, in Guildford, White Rock, and the surrounding areas. This is really, really important to me when I talk about doing audits and conducting audits of your workplace. I know a lot of your workplaces because I'm a local resident. And so I know the importance of what it means to making sure that our businesses are accessible for everyone. Designing meaningful access. So that's where we're going to get into more of the nitty gritty of what it means to have meaningful access versus accessibility. I'm going to share some of those best practices. What it means to create sensory-friendly workspaces. That's for individuals who may be on the autism spectrum or have other sensory conditions. Accessibility as an ongoing commitment. So not just what you hear today and then you stop. This is an ongoing commitment. This is something that we have to continually, work on. And I also understand as a person with a disability, born with cerebral palsy, that it's okay to be at the beginning of your journey, right? I'm not here to reprimand you for what you don't already have within your workspaces. I'm actually here to support you to understand where there may be some gaps so that you can better help to cater to all people who use your products and services, right? And that really matters with your ongoing commitment. Then should we have some time at the end, we'll have some time for some questions, but I do encourage you, if you have questions throughout the presentation, just to insert them into the chat box. And that way the team here will be able to hopefully have those in case we do miss them at the end. Just so that you're all aware, everything that I'm going to be covering here today is actually in the resources provided through Hire for Talent. So we're going to be talking about accessible and introduction to accessible environments. And you can go to hirefortalent.ca, toolkit, and accessible environments. Dylan was great and just posted the link into the chat here. And this is based on these 6 documents that we've created here. These were created on behalf of my organization, Meaningful Access Consulting. So I'm really, really pleased that a lot of the stuff I go into greater detail in these documents, and they're really easy to understand PDFs and web pages that you can download and provide to your team so they can better understand how to cater to creating more accessible workspaces. But let's talk about that a little bit. What does it actually mean for an accessible built environment? Now, accessibility goes beyond compliance. It's actually a place where we're creating environments where everyone can participate. So what do I actually mean when I say accessible built environments? Well, what we are trying to do is create a workspace that is welcoming for everyone, regardless of their abilities, regardless of anything else. And when your employees see that they're part of a diverse group of people and that they're able to fully participate, then they can contribute their talents. And as a result, you're going to have a more engaged and productive and innovative workforce, right? I can truly say that when you really show up for your staff, they show up for you. And in Canada, we're guided by standards such as the Accessible Canada Act and the CSA's B651 guidelines and standards. I'm going to talk about those in the next couple of slides here. Now, there's a real business case for being more accessible. Defining accessibility in the built environment. So when I'm going to be talking about accessibility throughout this presentation, I'm referring to the design of the spaces, but also the programs and services that you provide that will allow people with disabilities to fully participate without any barriers. Then when I refer to the built environment, yes, the PowerPoint will be emailed out. So absolutely, you'll be able to have a chance to take a look at these later. Thank you for asking that. When I refer to the built environment, this includes all human-made spaces, such as your buildings, but also your pathways to your entrance, of your facilities, as well as your parking and the routes and journey to the entry. Oftentimes, people don't think how people with disabilities might be impacted by the fact that they need to, for example, get to your workspace. So as a wheelchair user, for example, I might need to get to your workspace, but I might not drive. So is there accessible transit nearby? Are there mechanisms in place that if I don't have a vehicle or if I do rely on transit, am I actually able to get to the space? I'm not saying that it's your responsibility as a business owner to have that, but what we are trying to say is if you do and you are near, say, a bus stop that could support somebody who is not using a vehicle, then informing your staff of the most accessible entrances of your space, the most accessible bus stops if they are nearby, where accessible parking is located at your facilities, these kinds of things. The more that you can inform not only your employees, but potential visitors of your space, the more that they're going to know that you're really incorporating these as part of the best practices in your organization. And so lastly, in the workplace, these 2 definitions, they really mean that we're ensuring that everyone can navigate the space, the amenities, and perform their jobs fully. So if you're not aware, in Canada, we are kind of going off of a set of 3 standards, which I mentioned earlier. So there's the Accessible Canada Act, and this is our equivalent of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, believe it or not, this was only enacted in 2019, okay? So we've only actually had this federally and provincially mandated for crown corporations to begin with since 2019 for the past 6 years, right? And eventually this is going to trickle down to private-based businesses, right? So this is exactly why it's really important that we pay attention during this, because essentially if you can make these changes now before private businesses are essentially encouraged and mandated to be able to support all people of all abilities, you're kind of getting ahead of the curve, right? And so that's really, really important. There's also the Canadian Human Rights Act. So obviously, there are people out there who are going to potentially have human rights cases against employers for not meeting these basic needs. But I don't really like to focus in on that. I really like to focus on the fact that you're doing this because you want to make sure that everyone in our community can access your services. And then lastly, the CSA B651 standards, so that's the Canadian Standards Association standards for the built environment. And these are the latest standards that we work off. This is kind of the technical requirements in the built environment. Now, anybody can download the CSA B651-23 standards online for free. But the real key here is that there are accessibility professionals out there like myself who know how to apply these standards meaningfully. And this is exactly why it's really important to be able to have a professional like myself involved from the get-go if you have any questions like this or if you're conducting an audit, so that you can actually have that real-world support, that lived experience of what things to look for and why they make a difference, right? And then at the bottom here, I'm just going to hide myself really quickly. You can see that complying with these regulations benefits everyone, and it's not just people with disabilities, right? Think about parents who use strollers or our aging population, right? There's a lot of seniors out there who are also impacted by the same barriers as other individuals with disabilities, but they may not necessarily identify as a person with a disability themselves, right? Now, as I mentioned at the top of this, there's a real business case for investing in accessibility. Now, a lot of people think that individuals with disabilities are non-market participants, meaning that, oh, all people with disabilities, they must be on disability support services. They don't have the money to contribute to my business or to buy my services. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Now, the latest Stats Canada study showed that over 8 million Canadians aged 15 and older identified as having one or more disability. 8 million people, that's 27% of our country. And when you create an accessible workplace, you're actually helping to attract and retain a diverse talent pool, but it also improves safety for everybody and enhances your brand socially, right? So you're showing that, listen, if you come here, you're going to see yourself reflected here. Now, I mentioned 27% of people identify as having a disability, but did you know that actually more than 50% of our country is touched by disability in some way? So when you think of people with disabilities, think about their friends and family members, their caregivers, their mothers and fathers, the people that might look after that individual. So if you're missing out on that big of a populace, you're missing out on a huge market of individuals who do want to pay for your products and services. And this is exactly why building environments where we can actually see ourselves reflected means that those friends and family members are more likely to want to shop at your business versus someone else who isn't making that active effort to show, hey, listen, I do want you to be here. I do want you to be able to buy my products and services, right? So this is exactly why it's important to prioritize these things in our workspaces. Now, when it comes to conducting an accessibility audit, yes, there are some key things that you can do on your own without an accessibility professional. But beyond that, I highly recommend that you get a professional like myself into the room to be able to actually provide you something like a report or tools in order to implement those best practices. And further to that, it's much easier when you're applying for grants or you're applying for things within your business to help to subsidize those changes. If you actually have an accessibility professional who can write a memo for you, and that way you're not saying, hey, listen, guys, this is not my personal opinion. This is actually the opinion of my accessibility professional who's part of my team, and they've signed off on these changes. I find that oftentimes if you get a letter from someone like myself, that goes a long way for the approval of the grants, excuse me, and some of the money that you might be looking for within your organization in order to make and implement some of these changes. So just keep that in mind. So what are some of the benefits when it comes to conducting an audit? So obviously this is a crucial part of you reviewing your spaces and your services and in terms of identifying barriers. And so there's some images on the left-hand side there of me at a local building, just kind of conducting the space, kind of checking out the entrance, the heights of the tables, whether or not there are tactile components on the signage of an office building, so that if I was blind or if I was able to read Braille, is that something that has been provided by that workspace? Now, pro tip, engage your employees who actually have lived experience. So if you do have somebody who's identified as having a disability, there's nothing wrong with approaching that person and saying, hey, listen, Is this working for you? Does that actually make sense? What can we do to make your day-to-day life easier and allow you to do your job most effectively, right? So prior to even having me come through the door, talk to your staff, get them included, make them feel involved in the process, right? And as I say here, just some really quick bullet points. This is going to be able to provide you with a comprehensive picture of your current level of accessibility when you do an audit. It helps prioritize short-term and long-term goals because listen, I understand everything costs money and not everything you're going to be able to implement right away, right? But it also ensures that you're actually compliant with the latest legislation and the latest laws, right? So that's obviously making sure that you're protecting yourself from any future litigations and things like this. But from a personal level, this really demonstrates your commitment to inclusion and social responsibility. And lastly, it's going to enhance your spaces for usability and appeal for everyone. So I find that, oftentimes when you make spaces more accessible to people with disabilities who might be using mobility devices, have cognitive challenges, be blind, or have hearing challenges, these things actually are going to benefit more people than just those who identify with having a disability in and of itself, right? So just keep that in mind. So some common things that you might want to look for even prior to somebody like myself coming through the door. I've kind of identified some of the most common barriers here. So just let's take a look. So the lack of accessible parking spaces and drop-off areas near your entrances, right? And are your stairs or level changes? Do you have ramps? Or, do you have elevators as an alternative, right? So if you do have level changes, if you're on multiple levels, have you made these considerations? How narrow are your doorways, your hallways, your aisles? Is there enough clearance space for somebody to be able to navigate without creating tripping hazards? What about if you have a reception area? Do you have a high reception desk, or have you considered things like lowered countertops so that somebody like myself who uses a wheelchair on a regular basis can wheel up to that lowered countertop and be able to communicate with your staff more clearly, right? Do you have an accessible washroom? And if you do have an accessible washroom, are there adequate space to turn the chair around? Are there grab bars? Even more and more businesses now, they're looking at, do they have adult change tables? Because people are actually bringing in their family members who are adults who do require assistance with hygiene, depending on the type of services that you provide. This mostly applies for things like restaurants, potentially community centers, things like this, but it's just something to consider, right? Making sure you have grab bars, that kind of thing. Obstacles such as planters, these things are nice to look at, but sometimes they can create barriers. So just making sure that if you have pretty things or you're using things in the environment to help with navigation and landmarking, that's fantastic, but let's just not make sure that they're not in the way, right? Check your lighting. What kind of lighting are you providing? Now, more and more office spaces are moving away from the fluorescent lights. And why does that matter? Well, fluorescent lighting can be very sensitive for people with sensory issues, people who are on the autism spectrum. I know a lot of my friends and colleagues who are on the autism spectrum, they've complained that fluorescent lights, they can actually see the blinking in real time in ways that I can't. And imagine the kind of migraine headaches, stress, and anxiety that can create for other people. In fact, if you don't identify with sensory issues, many of us still don't understand why when we enter our workspace, we immediately feel anxiety. Now, I'm not saying that you feel that way because of your employer or where you work, but this could actually be as a result, surprise, surprise, of the environment itself. So, if you have old school fluorescent lighting, that could actually be creating a sensory issue for you and you didn't even realize it, right? And then lastly on the list here, we just have the lack of visual fire alarms. Now, this is really, really important from an emergency planning perspective. Visual fire alarms are now in the updated BC building code, but they weren't in the building code prior to the changes that happened about a year ago. So if you have upcoming renovations or things like this, you are going to have to adhere to the new building code. And that building code does require visual fire alarms for people who may be deaf and wouldn't know that an actual audible fire alarm is going off. And anywhere an employee is or could be by themselves, a visual fire alarm is required, right? So this is really, really important that you're aware of these things in advance so that person could safely leave the building in the event of an emergency. right? So by methodically examining each of these areas in your workspace, you're going to be able to identify these barriers and create an overall accessibility plan. Now, even small upgrades can make a huge difference. So if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to somebody like myself. Even if I'm not officially hired on yet, I'm always open to people sending me emails, asking me questions prior to going into, a deepened relationship with a consultant like myself. Now, one of the systems that you could consider utilizing is the Rick Hansen Foundation's Accessibility Certification Program. Now, this is something that I'm trained and designated in as a professional, and this is really the gold standard across our country when it comes to creating meaningful access. Now, there are various tools out there, so you don't have to necessarily use the RHFAC program, but this one is nationally recognized, and it really will help to provide a comprehensive review and report in 12 different categories. So I think that that's really valuable because we think about the routes to entrance, as I said, just as much as once somebody is actually in your space. What is their journey when they open their eyes from waking up that morning? What is their journey from am I actually going to make it into work today? Is there snow on the ground? What are the considerations that I'm going to have to consider, and how might that impact me in terms of getting to your workspace? Right? So just so you have a better understanding, an RHFAC audit is a really important thing. As I said, it covers 12 categories. But before an auditing process or somebody like myself coming in, gather up-to-date floor plans. If you have an evacuation plan, any other relevant documents that might help an auditor like myself in that process, right? Ensure that the auditor has full access to all the areas that you want them to actually be able to assess. So for example, if you don't have a facilities manager who's joining me on a walkthrough of your space the first time, make sure that I have a fob or key access to all the key areas that you would want me to take a look at, just so that I can give you a much more comprehensive look, right? Can consider bringing stakeholders. My wife and I operate in a business together, doing the accessibility consulting, and they love being fly on the wall. We often have facilitators join us on walkthroughs just so they can hear our back and forth as we're talking and we're saying, oh, did you notice this? Oh, did you notice the placement of that signage? Then they're taking their own notes. And you can have HR representatives. You can even have employees with disabilities. I would recommend, though, not more than 3 people joining a walkthrough, because then there's just too many cooks in the kitchen, as they say. And lastly, please be open to feedback and willing to invest in those short-term things. So as I mentioned, there are 12 categories through the Rick Hansen system. That's the vehicular access, exterior approach and entrances. Once you're in your building, your interior circulation, your interior services, what kind of services do you provide, your sanitary facilities, washrooms. Wayfinding and signage is a huge one, and oftentimes these are the easy wins you can have by creating better, more high contrast signage, things that make it more experiential for people and easier to understand, not even just for people with disabilities, but even English second language. So are you using iconography in your signage that is easy for anyone, even if they don't understand English? Is it easy for them to understand what you mean? Oftentimes people go, well, if I have a gender neutral washroom, what icon do I use? Well, how about a toilet? Right? Because most people understand what a toilet means, right? And so these are those key things to really consider. When it comes to emergency access, not just things like visual fire alarms, but also do you have an emergency plan that considers refuge areas for people with disabilities? Additional spaces. Now, if you're in a residential building, we also work with residences as well. Trails and pathways, if you have any outdoor spaces. Creating mind-friendly environments, and that's for people on the autism spectrum or have other sensory conditions. And then your technology and innovations. I'm going to just hide myself so you can see. If you want to learn more about the certification program, you can visit rickhansen.com and you can learn how to become certified in this program. And it's a very good program. So I would say that. Now, just some key things. There are accessibility consultants who go beyond just doing the built environment, and not all accessibility professionals are created equal. Some have chosen to have specialized areas of service. So for example, not only do I have built environment accessibility knowledge, but I also have knowledge from an HR policies perspective, right? So actually inclusive hiring of people with disabilities, which is where hirefortalent.ca is incredible for, because a lot of the resources on the website really go beyond just built environment. They actually go into those HR policies. So that should become your new homepage. You should bookmark hirefortalent.ca. It's incredible for medium and small businesses. It also works for large businesses as well. But I know that if you're on a tight budget, you're going to want to consider utilizing resources like this because they're there. And when you're considering which professional to hire, ask yourself, well, what is it that I want to accomplish within our organization? Right? Are you wanting them to do a review of your hiring and onboarding process? Well, then you might want to ask them if they have a background in inclusive employment or if they know how to review policies and documents as well. What about your internal and external communication best practices? What kind of training has your staff been involved in terms of furthering their development? What is your procurement process like? So many places tell me, oh, but Marco, we use a third-party website for when we have job applications and things like this, so we don't control their accessibility. Well, you don't, but you do control which vendors you hire within your organization, right? So ensuring that their software is also accessible for your staff and accessible for people who might be applying for a job. Oftentimes I have friends who are blind who say, well, I would have loved to apply for that job because my blindness doesn't impact my ability to do that job, but the job application process was not accessible to a screen reader. Right? So when you're actually talking to your vendors, ask them what kind of accessibility features do they have in place to make sure that everybody is included, right? What are your customer service policies and procedures? And again, this is really important, your emergency evacuation plan. So for many employers, conducting this accessibility audit goes far and beyond the built environment, and it's an excellent first step in developing that accessibility plan. And eventually, as business owners, we're all going to have to develop that. So acting on those audit results. So once now you've received the audit, what do you do, right? So once you've received an audit through the RHFAC program or another program, you're going to want to address any critical safety issues that are going to impact you immediately, such as tripping hazards, non-compliancy for fire alarms. Then you're going to move over to planning for things like renovations as part of your regular maintenance program and for upgraded scheduling and things like this. Involve your staff, as I mentioned before, right? This is going to go a long way to involve your staff to implement these changes, hear from them directly, and then consider pursuing full certification. So where you can actually say that we're a gold certified business on the RHFAC system. And those certifications now are good for 10 years. So this is the equivalent of like LEED certification with the environment, but for accessibility, right? So having a business and having a placard on your business that says we're a gold certified RHFAC business actually shows the community in so many ways how you're planning with individuals in mind. And again, you can start with low-hanging fruit and high-impact things that are low cost, like improving color contrast or adding tactile components to things like your signage, right? So just consider that. So I mentioned this already. What does it mean to create meaningful access? And what the heck is Marco talking about when he says meaningful access? Well, meaningful access is more about the experience, and it brings us back to that human experience. How do people actually feel when they enter your space? And yes, you can have things like ramps and elevators, but is it really meaningful? And that's where I'm going to kind of tell you a personal story from my own life. So a few years ago, my wife was working for an organization and they were having a Christmas party. Now, as I mentioned, I'm a wheelchair user. And so before I ever go out to any kind of Christmas party or anything like this, my wife and I will call ahead and actually double check and make sure that the environment is going to be accessible for my needs. So my wife called ahead to the venue that we were going for this Christmas party. And she said, hey, I just wanted to know, is your venue accessible? And the person on the other end of the phone said, oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. We're fully accessible, not to worry. So my wife said, okay, great. That's fantastic. And full disclosure, my wife, by the way, used to be the Universal Design and Accessibility Specialist for the entire city of Surrey. Okay, so she herself knows what she's talking about when it comes to accessibility. And so she definitely was like, okay, great. They said they're accessible, not to worry, hon. Well, this was in downtown Vancouver on the downtown east side, the venue that we were at. And so you know what it's like being here in Vancouver. It's not always the best of weather. And so that day it was pouring outside And we rolled up to the venue, and we're seeing that, there's kind of a dark and dingy alleyway to get to the venue. So we're kind of in this outdoor space, and it's raining down on us. My wife is in a very beautiful dress, and she had these brand new Wonder Woman heels on that she wanted to show off to all her friends and colleagues. And by this point, we're getting soaked. Well, she goes up and sees that the front entrance of this workspace, or this venue that we're going to, actually has a flight of stairs. Now, she was very confused by this because they had said that it was fully accessible. So I am sitting out there outside, and my wife runs up to the front entrance and knocks on the door and says, "Hi, I'm so sorry, but we were told this venue is accessible." And they said, "Oh, no, absolutely it is. Come with us around the back." So we're led down that dingy alleyway that I was explaining on the downtown east side, and everyone who's from this area knows what I mean when I say we weren't feeling super comfortable. And they said, "Well, why don't you wait near our accessible entrance and somebody will come out and get you?" So we're waiting, and a minute goes by, and then 2 minutes go by, 5 minutes go by. Finally, somebody opens what was clearly a freight entrance to this venue and says, "Why don't you come in?" Now, before we get you to your seated area, though, we are going to give you a special VIP tour through the kitchen. Now, it was becoming evidently clear to me that yes, they had an accessible space, but this accessibility came at the cost of me not using the entrance the way that all other people would use the entrance. And this special VIP tour, well, that was me just going through a cargo entrance and cargo door, and that was really the only way that I was able to get in. So by this point, I'm in a nice suit. My wife is drenched. I'm drenched. We're all covered in water. And we're going down through the kitchen, saying hi to all the staff and all these things. And then we're led down this hallway to a freight elevator. And I go down this freight elevator. And finally, we're inside the venue where all her friends and colleagues are. Well, much to my surprise, I look around the venue where everyone is enjoying the beginnings of the dinner, and everything is at bar height. Okay, so everyone is sitting on bar stools, and the tables are high, well high above my head as a wheelchair user, because in my chair I'm about 4 foot tall. Not one single table was a lowered table. So now I had the indignity of actually having to go up to our friends. First of all, them asking, "Why are you guys so wet?" And then we're explaining, well, we were outside for a little while. But now I'm realizing that where everyone else is eating, I'm not actually able to look at them eye to eye. I'm actually having to pull up a stool for myself and use it like a kid's table to eat off of the base of a stool where someone else was previously seated, because I wasn't able to transfer safely out of my chair into a stool to be seated next to my wife. And so I'm looking up at everyone else as they're enjoying themselves at this Christmas party, and I'm sitting there eating off of a stool. Well, this is where the straw broke the camel's back, because I learned that there was a mashed potato bar, and I'm a huge mashed potatoes guy. But again, all the buffet area was too high for me to read the contents of the buffet. I wasn't, excuse me, able to navigate the space independently. And I had the indignity of having to ask my wife, like a child, what all the items were for the meal for me to enjoy, to have her, make up a plate for me while I'm staring at everyone else's butt, to be quite frank. And this was really starting to eat away at me. But finally, I was like, okay, well, listen, I might be able to stay in this venue for a little bit longer, so long as I can use the restroom. And when I asked the staff where the restroom was, they said, absolutely, we do have an accessible restroom, but it's back down that hallway, through that freight elevator that you went up to, going up to the second level, and we do have a PIN code for you to use once you get to that washroom. So if you do need to use it, please let us know in advance so that we can give you the PIN code. So this is really starting to eat away at me, and eventually my wife and I decide that we don't stay at the party for the remainder of the time that we're there, because here's the deal, everyone. Yes, they had accessibility of this venue, but it wasn't meaningful access. So I could get inside of the building, but there wasn't anything that really considered what was I going to do when I got into the space, right? Was I going to be able to fully and meaningfully participate alongside everyone else? And the answer was no. So if you call up a venue and ask if it's accessible, the next question you should ask is to whom, right? Who is this accessible for? And to make matters worse, my wife did let her employer know at the time that this didn't work for her husband, who uses a wheelchair. And I'm not going to call anyone out in this moment and say who the employer was, but they basically said, oh, well, it worked for the majority of people that were there, so we're not going to change the venue next year, because the majority of the people were able to use that space. So again, look, at the end of the day, that's their personal choice. But I got to say that this is what I'm saying when I'm talking about meaningful access. Okay, this is not just about building spaces that look nice with ramps and elevators. You're actually welcoming people and saying, I want you included. I want you to be a part of this space, right? And that's going to have people be able to be more involved in the activity. So universal design, which is what meaningful access is based off of, is more than getting in the building. It's about creating that equitable experience for everyone. And that's literally why we call our company Meaningful Access Consulting, because we're truly trying to make meaningful access in the environments that we're involved in. And just something to consider. Again, it's not a one size fits all approach, and that's really the approach of meaningful access. It's the ability for a person to get into the building, to fully participate independently, I might add, right? So they don't necessarily need the support of someone else, although it's okay if that's the case sometimes, but really you're trying to work your way to that person being able to independently be involved. You're also going to want to make sure that you want to experience the entire environment as it's intended. It's a holistic approach that is people centric. So forget the dollars and cents. Remember the people who are involved in your spaces. And it considers things like the location of your building, who is inside of the building, what are the site conditions in and around the space, and what are some of the contributing community factors. And right here in Surrey, we have a lot of community contributing factors, whether that could be, there's individuals who are on the poverty line or below. There could be individuals near your workspace who are homeless. How might that impact people getting inside of your spaces? What are the things you need to consider before you're conducting any kind of community event or an event based for your business? So I'm going to just briefly touch on what universal design is. Universal design, if you don't know, is based on 7 principles by an architect from the 90s named Ron Mace. Now you can Google the 7 principles of universal design, but essentially these principles are the things to consider when it comes to the products and services that you provide to make sure that whether you're 5 or you're 95, your space or your product can work for somebody regardless of their ability. And I'm not going to name all 7 of these in this moment, but it includes things like equitable use, the size and space for the approach, how much physical effort does it take. So this is why you're seeing we don't use a lot of door knobs anymore. We use lever handles now, because if somebody has dexterity issues, they're going to have a problem turning doorknobs. So even if your hands are full, are you able to use an elbow, your wrist, or a closed fist to open doors if they're not automatic? Right? So really thinking of these things. Somebody might even have arthritis and be impacted by something that isn't universally designed, right? So regardless of your age or your ability, you're able to utilize these things. And if you're making the pitch for universal design, here's some things to really consider. Universal design supports all of us as human beings. There's a real business case, because once you create those changes, then you're actually going to be able to increase profits within your organization. It supports sustainability and any changing regulations or future legislations. It reflects everyone in your community, and that means that they're more likely to then shop at your business or access your services. Now, I hope nobody takes offense to this, but in the disability community, we often refer to people who aren't part of the community right now as TABs, or temporarily able-bodied. And we say that because you might not have these access needs today, but you might need them a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And so we're the only marginalized group that you can join at any time. So basically what I'm trying to say is you can thank me later for being part of the community and actually providing these changes in real time, so that if you do require these, or a friend or family member requires these things in the future, then those things were already going to be implemented and in place by the time that you need them. Right? And it encourages aging in place. Many communities have a seniors population, right? And so we want to make sure that we don't necessarily have to send off our grandfathers or our mothers or fathers into homes, right? So if we can build spaces that are accessible, then hopefully they can age in place. They can stay in their home or their environment where they're the most comfortable. I think that this really comes down to the medical model of disability versus the social model of disability. And that's where things kind of really flip it on its head, okay? So the medical model of disability says that I actually need to be fixed in order to fit into society. And this is kind of an old school way of thinking. So for example, somebody can't go to the movie theater on their own if they're deaf, because they can't hear the movie, right? So, oh yeah, that's on them, right? That they're deaf and they can't hear the movie. Or they can't go to a cafe by themselves if they're blind because, well, they can't read the menus. So why would they go by themselves, right? They're going to obviously bring somebody with them, right? Or I can't work at your workspace because, well, I'm a wheelchair user and I can't go up and down the stairs. But it's my problem because well, listen, I don't have the ability to walk. But the social model that kind of flips it on its head. This is what says that society actually needs to change so that I can fit in. Now, I'm not big on like sweeping mandates of everything, but I really want you to change your mindset about this around sweeping mandates and more think about it as think about that experience for the person. So it's not that the person couldn't go to the movie because they're deaf, it's that the movie hadn't provided closed captions or a way for the person to experience the movie in a different way. And it's not that that person who's blind can't go to the cafe on their own. It's that the cafe hasn't provided them braille or electronic menus or trained their staff on to read out those menu items for the person who may be blind. And lastly, it's that your building didn't have an elevator or ramp for me to access multiple levels. Oops, let me just hide myself there for a second. And that's why I couldn't work there as a wheelchair user or somebody with mobility challenges, right? So that's really the way. It's just changing your mindset and reframing it there. So there's some specific design considerations when it comes to applying these universal design principles. And again, these things are included in those documents on the Hire for Talent website. So go to toolkit number 8, and then you can actually look at some of these resources. These are pulled from the CSA guidelines, by the way. But for people with physical mobility access considerations, again, I've mentioned this already, you're going to want to consider ensuring that you have wide, unobstructed pathways to your doorways, avoid changes to your levels when possible, using smooth transitions and watching for those tripping hazards, providing automatic doors at your entrances and your washrooms, including ramps and lifts and elevators, offering accessible seating and adequate areas of space for people with mobility devices, and again, using those lowered countertop spaces. And some of the dimensions that are seen on the screen right now is the standard dimensions that are required for somebody who uses a wheelchair in order to sit at a desk space and the height that is required as far as the CSA guidelines are concerned. Okay? Now, some other considerations when it comes to sensory access. Okay, so for your touch, your feel, somebody who might be blind or have low vision. So tactile signage and warning strips at the edges of drop-off areas. Are your colors and textures defined by different sizes and different areas? Are you using non-glare lighting and matte finishes so that you're not getting those reflections that makes it hard for anybody to see any of these things? Is there acoustic separation and sound absorbing materials in your workspace that create less of an echo so that somebody can actually hear what is being said if they're hard of hearing, for example? Multi-sensory alarms, right? So not just audible, but visual is really, really important. And again, do you have designated low stimulation areas or areas where people, if there is a lot of noise or sound, or if you're a coffee shop, can people go away? Can they find another space in your workplace to go and find a quiet space if they need to change the environment, if it becomes too much for them, right? Specific considerations. Now, this is a really, really cool one when it comes to cognitive access. Now, you'll see on the right-hand side, there's some signage there from BC Ferries. I love that they've used this iconography because what the cool thing is about BC Ferries is they're not just saying when you go to a particular elevator or section of the ferry to go to section 4. Because somebody with cognitive challenges may not be able to understand what the number 4 looks like. But for example, whenever I park my car in the BC Ferries and go upstairs, my wife and I simply have to just remember, hey, we're at section 4 otter. Okay, otter or starfish. My 4-year-old daughter loves this because she's like, Daddy, remember? We are at starfish section. And that's so much easier to find when you're navigating the space. And you can do this in your workplaces too. Don't just rely on words or numbers or letters. Use simple logical layouts in your signage and your pathways that can help people of all abilities. Clear, concise signage, utilize symbols if you're able to. And you can use things like landmarks such as planters and say, oh yeah, it's actually the washroom that you want to use, the accessible washroom, is the one that's near those 2 planters near the front. That's a good way for somebody to be able to understand that you're landmarking using color coding or physical items to help address and find navigational areas within your space. You can provide step-by-step instructions, making sure your space is clear. Calming and muting colors really helps people who are on the autism spectrum. so no busy patterns, and using natural lighting. So you can see I've got my window right here. The natural light is coming in at me. Anytime that you can see these type of plants and things like natural things from outside, that actually is a calming thing, especially for people with anxiety or ADHD. And I just put here that Walgreens in the United States has done this with some of their distribution centers. So they have flexible workspaces. And again, for people with cognitive challenges, they'll say something like head over to station 55 or rhinoceros, because they actually have an animal symbol that they've utilized in order to identify for people with cognitive disabilities on what station that they might be working at for that day, as opposed to just the number, just like BC Ferries, right? So now how about when you're making these changes in your spaces, you might be retrofitting or you might be doing a full new build, right? So if you're retrofitting your space, switching things like from doorknobs to lever handles, as I mentioned, adding kick plates to widen and widening your doors. That way that you're obviously not getting as much damage on your door from people who are using physical devices. Installing offset hinges to widen that door, which is really, really cool. Lowering a portion of your reception desk, we've touched on that. A variety of different seating options, including armrests, backrests. Somebody might have back issues or temporary disabilities. And so having balance-based things with armrests that they can lean on in case they need it. Sometimes you don't want to just have a stool where you don't have the ability to rest your back. That can be really challenging for certain people. Adding tactile high contrast, we just mentioned that. And then if you're doing a new build, some things to consider is obviously creating your floor plan to be more open and spacious, providing extra room in your corridors, curbless showers in all your washrooms. Say, for example, you have shower spaces and locker spaces. Is there ability to have a roll-in shower for somebody who might be using a wheelchair with a bench in that shower, just so that they can sit down while they're using the shower? Having adjustable heights and counters for your workstations, under stair storage to keep things tucked away, and then the creative use of textures and other things in the space as well. I'm going to briefly touch on sensory friendly environments. I'm going to try to get through these sections quickly so that we have some time for some questions here. So I've already touched on these things for people who are have sensory issues, right? These are individuals who may be on the autism spectrum or have other sensory issues. So designated spaces that are going to reduce those sensory stimulation things, providing flexible workspaces, and also sensory preferences. A lot of people have sensitivity to colognes or perfumes. So there could be fragrance-free policies in your workplace that could help to mitigate that. Or also, you know, people bring in this delicious meal of fish that they had last night and then they cook it in the microwave. And sometimes even those smells can really impact other coworkers. So, you know, it's okay if you bring these things in so long as you check with the surrounding people that that's not going to impact them. And again, I mentioned this already, but maximize that natural lighting in your workspace because it's going to really pull away from those fluorescent lights and the things that might cause aggravation for some people. So when it comes to navigation and landmarking circulation, I mentioned this already, use artwork, sculptures, other things in the built environment to help people navigate the space so that they don't get lost. Now you can place things like benches for rest areas along pathways so people can rest along along their way if you have a long hallway or things like this, so long as it's not creating a barrier. Creating nooks with memorable routes. That's how I memorize a lot of the spaces that I'm in. Designating certain wings with color areas. You see this a lot in hospitals that they use follow the red line to get to this area of the hospital. Why can't we do that in small businesses as well? Or at least spaces where maybe you're in a warehouse and you need to designate certain areas. Be consistent with your signage and your graphics. So don't just use one symbol for washrooms in one area and then a different symbol in another area. Be consistent, right? You can use visual maps and landmarks throughout that really help people to identify where they are in your space and in your building. And for some of those sensory things that I mentioned off the top, somebody might have a seat that's near a bathroom, so they're constantly hearing the flushing of toilets and things like this. If you're able to, consider moving them if that's a problem for them or if they're very sensitive to these sounds. You can also install mechanical or quiet flush toilets so that that's not an issue. Providing manual paper towels alongside air dryers so that they can use paper towels and not make as much of a sound. You can use sound absorbing materials on the walls or in the ceiling. Obviously, as I mentioned, you can relocate somebody away from high traffic areas. You can have a quiet bathroom area again. So maybe not all your bathrooms, but maybe one of your bathrooms is more quiet. And of course, making sure that you have regular maintenance on this equipment and these spaces so that you can replace things that are making excessive noise is probably a good thing. And then, of course, lowering the odor in general in your workspace, just so that people who do have sensitivity to smells aren't impacted by it in that way. Now, accessibility is an ongoing commitment. This is a big one because, I don't want you to get a accessibility review and then just leave it for the next 20 years and say, well, we had a review 20 years ago, but things can change, right? So making sure that you're allocating part of your budget for things like resources on enhancing your space for accessibility. Integrate regular accessibility checks as part of your process and the culture within your organization. You can also gather insights from your employees directly to get that feedback, as I mentioned at the top of the presentation. And hey, listen, if you're doing good things or if you've provided great things, share that on social media. If you get your RHFAC designation, have your social team talk about that, regardless of how big your business is. Even if you're a small business, my wife and I are the only employees in our business, so we're a micro business, and we still celebrate all of our changes and all of the things that we've gotten as awards as a small business, because we love that. And people want to shop with us because they know and they want to use our services because they know that we're a family firm and they know that we're a firm that's taking it seriously when it comes to accessibility and also meeting the needs of many people. So we get a lot of business through people seeing that on social media because we promote the awards we're getting. And celebrate with your staff. Remember that this accessibility journey is a journey, and it's not about the destination. So the destination does come, but it's really the journey where you're going to see those changes. So the key takeaways and conclusion from this last hour of talking: create accessible workspaces that promote inclusion, boost productivity, and attract a diverse talent pool. Because when you do that, people see themselves reflected in your spaces and your places. Provide small, impactful changes such as audits and sensory-friendly spaces to create significant benefits for all your employees. Utilize universal design principles and accessible environments to improve not only the experience that the employees have, but also enhance safety and usability for everybody. Remember, accessibility is a continuous journey, and it requires regular audits, feedback, and commitment to make those improvements. And lastly, you're going to want to engage with your staff and make sure that they have felt like, especially if they have lived experience, that you've really considered their needs throughout the process. So thank you so much. We're going to now open up the floor to some questions. I love it. We have about 9 minutes left. So if there are any questions that have been entered into the chat, maybe we can start with those first. I'm going to put my contact details on the screen for just a moment. So that way, if you have any questions that you don't feel comfortable asking in front of a group of individuals, you can also email me at marco@marcopasqua.com. I also encourage you to add me on LinkedIn or any other social platform. I'm always willing to offer an olive branch to anyone. And lastly, I will just say this. This presentation has been brought to us by the CBDC, the group behind Hire for Talent. Thank you so much, actually, for allowing me, Dylan, to really share my personal story and to really show people why accessibility matters from more than just a cost-benefits ratio. So thanks so much.
Yeah, while we wait for some people to come in with some questions, I will just say that we did post the survey in the chat. We had to tighten up some of the survey submission, the way that we kind of do all the verification process, just for anybody who's in there. So you will have to verify your email now, just to kind of tighten up the process. But in order to get the honorarium, you have to first be present here. It's one per business, and then also you have to be able to do the survey as well. So yeah, one of the things that stuck out, somebody talked about this story that you're about the accessible and going into the restaurant, and I just wanted to emphasize that you use that as an example to make sure that people kind of understand what's kind of going through people's mind and how to kind of be a little bit more empathetic. So he uses that example mainly to ensure that you guys understand that universal design is mostly to be just about being empathetic, and at its core, it's to make sure that everyone can participate in a meaningful way. So somebody just made a comment, so I wanted to make sure that. Okay. So we do have a first question here, Marco. It says, any considerations for hybrid or remote companies?
Yes, 100%. So the utilization of technology is huge. So you heard Rona mention at the top of this presentation, letting your staff know that they can turn on captions as well as transcriptions for any meetings that you have. So a lot of companies now are utilizing things like AI note takers. And you might think, uh-oh, well, that's not a good thing for intellectual property, but actually it's a lifesaver for me as somebody who has a hard time taking notes during meetings because of my cerebral palsy. It infects my right hand. And so for being able to retain that information at a later date, having those meeting notes sent out to staff immediately after the meeting, as well as things like captioning helps people, not just those who may be deaf or hard of hearing, but also those who may have ADHD or anxiety issues, or have trouble following along during the meeting. This means that they can read those transcriptions at a later time, so that if they are operating hybrid, that there's an ability for them to participate meaningfully as well. I also mentioned this in some of the other presentations I give. Go to the people who are hybrid and working out of office first for their feedback, because it's so easy for us to forget that those people are participating virtually, and we go to the people who are physically in the room with us first for feedback, and we forget that the entire portion of the staff is actually operating remotely. So make sure that you're going to those remote individuals first, and if you have somebody who requires ASL or American Sign Language interpretation, that you're trying to book well in advance, so that if they are operating off-site or remotely, that they have the ability to participate as well. Any specific specifications for marketers, advertisers, media professionals? 100% hard code your captions in your videos by default. Okay, so if you have social media and you're doing videos, make sure that you're embedding captions in your videos, even if you don't have anyone that you're tailoring who may be deaf. And the reason I say this, by hard coding, I mean that you can't toggle them on or off. And that's an easy one, because by including captions, this is good in a time where social media, our attention span is that of a goldfish. So if you're going through your feed and you actually see words that stick out to you that actually mean something like diversity, accessibility, you're more likely to unmute that video on your social media feed to learn more about what's being said, as opposed to not seeing those captions and not knowing. So this actually captures the entire audience, not just those who are deaf. And I got to tell you, when I started captioning more of my videos and making sure that my documents were accessible to screen readers, my engagement went up by 10 times. So more and more people were like actually contacting me, because they're like, oh, I saw your video on Twitter or X, and I saw it on Instagram, and I saw the captions, and that really stuck out to me, and I wanted to ask you a question. So for you marketers out there, use that. Caption your videos. Make sure that your documents are accessible to screen readers. Get somebody who has specialty in digital documentation who can give you that advice. Somebody else here asks, any suggestions about how to enhance accessibility when organizing community events in various venues? Actually, Dylan, I think there is some community events documentation. There might be on hirefortalent.ca. I'm not 100% sure, but if that isn't the case, I actually do have a how to organize accessible events document that I can provide to Dylan following this presentation, and then Heather and the team can provide that accessible documents, accessible events and meetings document to those who are in attendance today. So how about I commit to you that I provide that? Oh, there you go. Accessible meetings and events. Dylan's got it. So there we go. So there's the link right there. You can access that, and that's going to really help you when creating these different events and meeting spaces. We have
We
about
did have
3 minutes.
one question that we skipped.
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
talked a
Yeah, go
little
ahead.
bit about key takeaways and how do you stay ahead of the curve. And I might just take a quick question, quick seconds to answer that.
Do
A
that.
lot of what we do at Hire for Talent is always ongoing research. So we are actually trying to stay ahead of the curve a lot of the time. So I would say definitely check out the Hire for Talent website. We're always updating it for new issues that we find come up, especially within our research. So, and Marco, you can also answer that from your end as well.
No, 100%. I would agree with that. Staying ahead of the curve, that's really, really good. Like I said, maybe touch base or touch in with an accessibility professional. A phone call is free. An email is free. So, touch in with somebody and say, listen, I just have like a one-off question. Maybe you could help me to answer this question. That will really, really help you out to stay ahead of the curve. And like I said, these changes are happening rapidly in your industries. So staying ahead of that curve is going to mean that you're not left behind. by anyone else who's utilizing these changes, but Hire for Talent has got to be one of the single-handedly best resources that is out there in terms of every aspect from start to finish: hiring, onboarding people with disabilities, the built environment, the legal requirements, some of those aspects. So really, it's a wide spectrum of all the things that you can really expect. And again, I encourage anyone to connect with me on like LinkedIn or things like this if you have any additional questions, because I can support you in that way. Let's see here. Timmy says, wonderful, insightful session, though it seems a bit rushed. Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. We want to make sure there's a lot to fit in 1 hour, and I'm fast talking Italian, so I apologize. Sometimes I got to slow myself down. Yes, there is a copy of the presentation, as well as the Board of Trade is recording this session. Okay, so you will be able to access this session after the fact in the recording, so you can slow me down at 0.5 speed and then just spend more time with me after the session. So that would be really, really great. But yeah, absolutely, we'll be able to provide you with additional resources. And as I said, the accessible environments section or tool 8 on the Hire for Talent website, that is the section that really covers the gambit of what we discussed here today. Okay,
Yeah,
so we have about a minute
we're running
left.
out of time.
Yeah,
Here.
I think that's about it. But again, if there's additional questions, please reach out to the Board of Trade staff, and they'll send those questions over to me or connect with me personally.
And to speak on staying ahead of the curve, a lot of what we do at Hire for Talent, sometimes the language becomes outdated and we have to update it as we go. So people are really understanding. And whenever you're talking to a consultant, they're one of the most understanding people. So like Marco said, those one-off questions, oftentimes they're happy to answer because a lot of their funding to some of those consultants comes from federal government. So their mandate is to help people as well. So oftentimes it's not too much of a stretch for them to provide their services in that way. So we will respect everybody who did participate today. I'll share the actual survey in the chat one more time. Make sure you try to get that finished today so that we don't have to chase you for it afterwards. It makes it a lot quicker for everybody to get their honorariums after the fact. I just want to thank Rona and her team today for providing us with the space to send our message out there. I want to especially thank Marco for all his years of service and making sure that everybody can have the messaging in a nice compact way, and always being open to the discussion as well. So I don't know if the Surrey Board of Trade wanted to say something before we go, but I just wanted to thank everybody for being here today as well. So I'll pass it back to you, Rona, to close it up.
Thank you, Marco and Dylan, for being with us today and sharing this important information. You've highlighted the critical need to create meaningful spaces that are not only physically accessible, but also truly inclusive and welcoming for everyone. This goes beyond simply meeting building codes. It's about designing environments where people of all abilities can participate, connect, and feel the sense of belonging. We will be sending you the recording and the facilitator's contact information after this session. Many more of this type of sessions are coming up, so please be sure to check our website at businessinsurrey.com. Make it a great business morning, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.